Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we play tales to take you away from today. On the podcast today, we're heading to the hospital. Not to worry, though. We'll be going with a few professional ghost hunters.
Sure. That sounds fine.
We have stories about driverless tractors and rainbows. Mark Nelson gives us more information on the Nipe in our continuing story, Anything You Can Do, by Randall Garrett. And we finish the show off visiting with Tom's relatives in the South. So buckle on in. It starts with this 5-minute mystery.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by the word precipice. I really hate this word. It's just so pretentious, and one of those that only fancy people say, or maybe Dracula. I don't know, but I do know you should just say cliff. Here's our story.
Martha, I have something to ask you.
Darling, it's been such a lovely afternoon here on the mountain.
Martha, I want a divorce.
Divorce?
Yes, there is someone else. I need my freedom.
No, I won't give it to you.
I thought that would be your answer, my dear.
And why did you ask me?
Because, Martha, I did not want to kill you.
Howard?
Yes, Martha. I've got to be rid of you. That's why I brought you to the mountain. There is a precipice over there. It is a long fall, my dear.
We might as well begin with a description of the events leading up to your wife's falling over the precipice.
As you wish, Sergeant. It was such a lovely afternoon that Martha, my wife, and I decided to come up here to the mountain. We brought some lunch with us and planned to make a day of it.
About what time was that, sir?
It was about 3 o'clock.
I see. Would you go on, please?
About 4 o'clock, it began to thunder, and very shortly thereafter, lightning and rain started.
Did you find shelter?
Yes, we were rather fortunate to find a cave about 100 yards from here on the west side of the mountain.
What time did it stop raining?
About an hour later, Sergeant.
What did you do then?
This is quite a lot of questioning, Sergeant. Is it all necessary?
Yes, I'm afraid it is. I hope you don't object. We're almost through.
No, not if it is necessary. Well, to continue. We left the cave and continued to the crest of the mountain. As we got to the top, my wife called my attention to a rainbow, which had suddenly appeared to the west behind the sun.
And that was about 5 o'clock.
Yes. Well, when Martha saw the rainbow, she suggested, as a sort of joke, that we try to follow to the end of the rainbow. You know the pot of gold at the rainbow's end?
Yes, of course. What happened after she suggested it?
I laughed and tried to dissuade Martha from the idea, but she began running down the incline and waving for me to follow her.
Did you?
No, I shouted for her to turn back, but she was running downhill too quickly to stop. Suddenly, she slipped on some loose rock and fell down. She turned over and rolled right off the precipice. It was horrible.
There was no way you could have helped her?
Of course not. Are you insinuating...
No, my mountain climbing friend. I'm merely saying that I don't believe your story. It's a lie.
How does the state policeman know that Howard lied in the story of how his wife met her death? In just a moment, we'll know, but first...
A lie? Sounded good to me. That is, if I hadn't been there for the killing and all. When you think about it, it's all rather dark and creepy, and they used the word precipice way too many times. I would have much rather they used the word escarpment. Now that is a ring to it.
And now, back to our story.
Howard, your story contained one rather obvious flaw which condemns it as a lie. You told me just a few minutes ago that after the storm cleared, you and your wife discovered a rainbow to the west, behind the sun, which, my friend, is an impossibility. A rainbow is always formed opposite the sun by the reflection of its rays.
Done in by a rainbow. What would the trout say? Did you know that the word rainbow originates from the Old English renboga, ren meaning rain, and boga meaning bow? Imagine the arch shape of an arrow making flight through the air, and I think you get the idea. I think this mystery should have been brought to you by the word rainbow. Did you like the Best Of show last week? Going forward, these will contain more older stuff and less new stuff. I'll be working on putting more of these together for the future, so please do comment on that show so that I can make it something you want to look forward to. I did receive a couple notes, and those have ranged from "seems slow" to "I loved it." Thanks for those comments. I'm looking for people to take the online surveys to show potential sponsors just who my audience really is. It only takes a minute to fill out and can be found on the main website, or a link is in the show notes each week. Please help out, won't you? I finally have enough stories to proceed with the military salute. I want to thank all the folks who sent in their stories. It's going to be a fantastic episode full of tales sent in by you guys. Now I'm looking for scary stories. That's right, I'm starting to prepare for the 8th annual month of Spooky. I'm lining up the guests for this year, and this is going to be the best spooky event ever. Jim Harold will be back for the 8th time. He confirmed that today. I sent out a request to bring Sylvia back for the 5th time, and I've also booked an Indiana-based paranormal group called PIOT. More about them in just a minute. But for now, these are your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Our first story this time comes from Schuler Johnson, who is with an Indiana-based paranormal team called Paranormal Investigations and Observations Team, PIOT for short. They've been in the field since 2011. Schuler had this to say. We started as a hobby and then became more developed and organized paranormal team. There have been a lot of ups and downs, but plenty of experiences that are simply priceless. Our team is a community organization, therefore everything we do is completely free of charge for our clients. We believe our passion for doing this is important enough to make our services free. We conduct residential and historical investigations. We've come a long way, and I can proudly say that we've made it to a point where we can help and educate others in this confusing and scary topic. Schuler didn't stop there, and he went on to tell a story from one of their early investigations. Here is that story. One of my most memorable stories came in July of 2012. My paranormal team at the time consisted of 4 members, including myself. We had been investigating for about a year and were at the Central State Hospital, which is an old mental asylum built in 1848 and closed in 1994. The 148-acre institution was honestly quite the hidden gem. It is a beautiful place filled with so much history and spirits. At the main gate is a paved road which runs through the middle of the property. Surrounding this road on all sides are several buildings in various states of decay and demolition. These include the administration building, the women's ward, men's ward, surgery ward, the cafeteria, the old powerhouse, nurses' quarters, and finally the pathology building. We had been to this location at least 5 times already and had some pretty creepy and compelling evidence. We've heard voices, doors slamming, and had objects thrown, but oddly enough, no visual encounters. Little did we know that was about to change. We had done our research on the place and had investigated most of the buildings. However, we had not been to all of them or the courtyard. The fact is that we were more intrigued with the buildings. However, there were stories that claimed people had died in the courtyard over the years, so for some reason, something struck my mind to have us start there this evening. We drove to the empty park, and all of us peered out of our windows. We wanted to see that familiar dark land as we had done every time previously. As we parked and left our car, each of us felt a dark, unwelcoming feeling, and we spoke of it. We grabbed our gear and made our way towards the open field. As we walked across the field towards the women's ward, we felt as if that we were being watched from the broken windows. The building was 2 stories high, had pitch-black windows from one side to the other. Some of the windows had dirty white drapes fluttering out of them, making them seem a heck of a lot creepier than they really were. We made our way up a hill and passed through some small bushes that led to a sidewalk. The path started from the men's ward and curved around the women's ward, eventually leading out to the main road. We followed the sidewalk about 20 feet towards the main road and stopped suddenly. 2 of my 3 investigators aggressively whispered for us to duck down and stay quiet. Once we had all crouched down, they whispered to us that they had heard something moving in the courtyard roughly 50 feet from our current position. The sound was like pacing or shuffling through the bushes. It was a good distance away, but loud enough for them to hear. The night was mostly still, not much wind, but there was enough to give off a soft breeze and gently move the trees. We waited on the sidewalks as our eyes adjusted to the dark environment. After a couple minutes, our vision adjusted and our hearing seemed to sharpen. We could now see some small bushes and a couple trees out to our right, and to our left was an army of trees scattered everywhere. The courtyard is fairly large, and the 4 of us were aligned next to each other. I was on the far right, with my other 3 investigators to my left. I remember sitting in that one spot for a good 25 minutes. During that time, I was attempting to speak with the spirits said to reside on that land. We were still amateurs at this time and weren't expecting anything to happen. However, after that 25-minute period of quiet concentration and making the attempt to speak to the dead, it happened. Roughly 50 feet away from us, misting out of a small bush, came a woman in white. She literally misted into our view and began moving towards the tree in front of her. The distance between her and the tree couldn't have been any more than 4 feet. As she came into view, I saw her face. It was that of a human, and I could see where her features should have been. However, she didn't have any eyes, mouth, nose, or even skin tone. They were all gone. There were only indents of where they should have been, and her skin was pure snow white. The woman had thin black hair that flowed down to her lower back. She wore a patient gown and kept her arms to her side. She moved towards the tree, but she didn't move her head an inch. What really took my reality for a test drive was that she had no feet. This woman was literally floating like a balloon as she walked to the tree before her. Just as soon as she appeared, she evaporated away like cigarette smoke. It was out of this world. Another odd thing that happened was, as I watched her move from the bushes to the tree, was everything around me went dead silent and slowed down. The only thing that was moving normally was the woman in white and the trees. But all sound was absent. Once she disappeared into nothing, my ears popped, and the sounds of the world slowly came back to life, and everything moved at normal speed again. However, at this point, I began to ask myself, what is normal? After staring out into the now empty courtyard for a good 30 seconds, I grabbed my fellow investigator who was right next to me. I proceeded to ask him if he had seen anything move out into the courtyard. He made direct eye contact with me and shook his head in agreement with wide eyes. It was mind-blowing. After gathering our thoughts and discussing the occurrence with the other 2 investigators, we learned that they had not seen the woman, despite the fact that they were looking in the same direction at the same time. Before we continued our investigation, we verified that what we had seen was indeed paranormal and not some kind of hoax or misconception. As we made the short distance from where we were sitting to where the woman was, we inspected the entire area. We checked the top of the trees with our flashlights. We searched the bushes. We searched behind the trees. We literally looked everywhere. There were no signs of people, props, gadgets, animals, or anything that could have tricked our minds into seeing what we saw. We finally concluded that what we had seen was in fact paranormal. The only thing I regret from that evening was not having any equipment running at all. To this day, I haven't experienced anything else like this, which is bizarre considering we have a 7-year run with the paranormal. Schuler Johnson, PIOT, Indiana. What an incredible story, Schuler. I love a good ghost story, and this one provided many chills. I want everyone to know that I have invited Schuler to come on the show and tell us all about PIOT and tell us more stories. He has graciously accepted and will be part of the October month of Spooky 2018. If you want to hear more right now about the Paranormal Investigations and Observations team, you can head to Facebook and search for PIOT, or you can go to their website, which is piotparanormal.com. I will have both those links in the show notes. Thank you, Schuler. On a sad note, I spoke with Schuler on the phone and found out that the Central States Hospital is in the midst of being torn down and sold off in sections. Sad end for this 170-year-old institution. Our second story comes from Minnie Swan. That is the name, folks, spelled M-I-N-N-I-E. She writes us from Michigan, and her story truly is amazing. Hello, Ron. We have a saying here. You know you're from Michigan when your idea of a traffic jam is waiting for 10 cars to pass a tractor. My story is about just an event, and I can't wait to tell you about it. I was 13 years old and was going to a dune buggy race with my dad at Silver Lakes Dunes. He raced in an annual event there. We came up to a traffic jam. Get it? Traffic jam. It was going amazingly slow as each car passed the tractor. Everyone seemed very interested in what was going on with it. Finally, when it came time for us to pass, my dad let out a shocked gasp. He pointed at the driver's cab, and I saw that there was no one there. The tractor was driving itself. We have another saying in Michigan. Why build a straight road when you can put curves in it? I don't know if that's a real statement, but if you live here, you know it's true. This road we were on was quite the example. But somehow this tractor was following the road, very slow, but doing it. My dad drove ahead and found a place to park our rig and sat to wait for the tractor to show up. My dad's plan was to get into the tractor and bring it to a stop. Others pulled over to watch the show as well. The problem was, the tractor never came around the corner. Now, my dad brought a motorcycle along with us and took it off the trailer to go find out what happened. He came back a few minutes later and said he could find no sign of the thing, nor had it run off the road. Others tried and failed to find that tractor as well. I offer no explanation for this, nor can I prove any of it. It was the late 1980s, and I'm pretty sure they didn't have the tech to make a self-driving tractor in those days. Minnie Swan, Michigan. What a crazy story. One that I say has to be true. It's a real head-scratcher for sure, and I can't even imagine making that one up. Thank you, Minnie, for your story. It truly belongs on Ron's Amazing Stories.
Next, it's time for another installment of Anything You Can Do by Randall Garrett. In Chapter 7, we learned that not only is the Nipe's location known, it's been under constant video surveillance. We were also introduced to Dr. George Yoritomo, a psychologist on Mannheim's team. In Chapter 9, 3 prominent businessmen travel all the way to the asteroid belt in order to try to hire Stanley Martin, the world's most renowned private investigator, to track down the Nipe. Martin turns them down cold. And now, Chapters 9 and 10 of Anything You Can Do by Randall Garrett. Colonel Walter Mannheim tapped with one thick finger the map that glowed on the wall before him. "That's his nest," he said firmly. "Right there, where those tunnels come together." Bart Stanton looked at the map of Manhattan Island and at the gleaming colored traceries that threaded their various ways across it. "Just what was the purpose of all those tunnels?" he asked. "The majority of them were for rail transportation," said the colonel. "The island was hit by a sun bomb during the Holocaust and was almost completely leveled and slagged down. When the city was completely rebuilt afterwards, there was naturally no need for such things, so they were simply all sealed off and forgotten." "He's hiding directly under Government City," Stanton said. "Incredible." "It used to be one of the largest seaports in the world," Colonel Mannheim said, "and it very probably still would be if the inertia drive hadn't made air travel cheaper and easier than seagoing." "How did he find out about those tunnels?" Stanton asked. The colonel pointed at the north end of the island. "After the Holocaust, the first returnees to the island were wild animals which crossed over from the mainland to the north. The Harlem River isn't very wide at this point, as you can see. There was a bridge right at about this point here, the very tip of the island. It had collapsed into the water, but there was enough of it to allow animals to cross. Because of the rocky hills at this end of the island, there were places which were spared the direct effects of the bomb, and grasses and trees began growing there. That's why it was decided that section should be left as a game preserve when the government built the capital on the southern part of the island." His finger moved down the map. "The upper 3 miles of the island, down to here, where it begins to widen, are all game preserve. There's a high wall at this point, which separates it from the city, which keeps the animals penned in, and the ruins of the bridges which connected with the mainland have been removed, so animals can't get across anymore. 2 years after he arrived, the Nipe was almost caught. He had managed to get here from Asia by stealing a flyer in Leningrad. According to Dr. Yoritomo and the other psychologists who have been studying the Nipe, he apparently does not believe that human beings are anything more than trained animals. He was looking then, as he is apparently still looking, for the real rulers of Earth. He expected to find them, of course, in Government City. Needless to say, said the colonel with a touch of irony, he failed. But he was seen? Asked Stanton. He was seen and pursued, but he got away easily, heading north. The whole island was searched, from the southern tip to the wall, and the police were ready to start an inch-by-inch combing of the game preserve by the end of the third day after he was seen. But he hit and robbed a chemical supply house in northern Pennsylvania, killing 2 men, so the search was called off. It wasn't until 2 years later, after an exhaustive analysis of the pattern of his raids had given us enough material to work with, that we determined that he must have found an opening into one of the tunnels up here in the game preserve. He gestured again at the map. Very likely, he immediately saw that no human being had been down there in a long time, and that there wasn't much chance of a man coming down there in the foreseeable future. It was a perfect place for his base. "How does he move in and out?" Stanton asked. "This way." The colonel traced a finger down one of the red lines on the map, southward, until he came to a spot only a little over 2 miles from the southernmost tip of the island. The line turned abruptly toward the western shore of the island, where it stopped. "There are tunnels that go underneath the Hudson River at this point and emerge on the other side over here in New Jersey. The one he uses is only one of several, but it has one distinct advantage that the others do not. All of them are flooded now. The sun bomb caved them in when the primary shockwave hit the surface of the water. The tunnel he uses has a hole in it big enough for him to swim through. In spite of his high rate of metabolism, the Nipe can store a tremendous amount of oxygen in his body and can stay underwater for as long as half an hour without breathing apparatus, if he conserves his energy. When he's wearing his scuba mask, he's practically a self-contained submarine. The pressure doesn't seem to bother him much. He's a tough cookie." "I'll remember that," said Stanton somberly. "I won't try to race him underwater." "No," said Colonel Mannheim. "No, I wouldn't do that if I were you." They both knew that there was a great deal more to it than that. In spite of the near miracle that the staff of the Neurophysical Institute had wrought upon Stanton's nerves and muscles and glands, they could only go so far. They could only improve the functioning of the equipment that Stanton already had. They could not add more. His lungs could be, and had been, increased tremendously in efficiency of operation, but the amount of air they could actually hold could only be increased slightly. There was no way to add much extra volume to them without doing so at the expense of other organs. In a breath-holding contest, the Nipe would win easily, since his body had evolved organs for oxygen storage, while the human body had not. You cannot make a silk purse out of a sow's ear if you are limited to the structures and compounds found in sow's ears. The best you can do is make a finer, stronger, more sensitive sow's ear. "I understand that the Nipe has his hideout pretty well bugged with all kinds of alarms," Stanton said. "How did you get your own bugs in there without setting off his?" "Well, at first we didn't know for sure what he was up to. We weren't even sure he was actually down in those tunnels. But we suspected that if he was, he'd have alarms set all over the place, perhaps even alarms of types we couldn't recognize. But we had to take that chance. We had to watch him." He walked over to the nearby table and opened a box some 12 inches long and 5 by 5 inches in cross-section. "See this?" he said as he took a furry object from the box. It looked like a large rat, dead, stiff, unmoving. "Our spy," said Colonel Mannheim. The rat moved along the rusted steel rail that ran the length of the huge tunnel. To a human being, the tunnel would have seemed to be in utter darkness, but the little eyes of the rat saw the surroundings as faintly luminescent, glowing from the infrared radiations given out by the internal warmth of the cement and steel. The main source of the radiations was from above, where the heat of the sun and the warmth from the energy sources in the buildings on the surface seeped through the roof of the tunnel. But here and there were even brighter spots of warmth, spots that moved about on glowing feet and sniffed blindly at the air with tiny glowing noses. Rats. On and on moved the rat, its little pinkish feet pattering almost silently on the oxidized metal surface of the rails. Its sensitive ears picked up the movements and the squeals of other rats, but it paid them no heed. Several times it met other rats on the rail, but most of them sensed the alienness of this rat and scuttled out of its way. Once it met a rat who did not give way. Hungry perhaps, or perhaps merely yielding to the paranoid fury that was a normal component of the ratish mind, it squealed its defiance to the rat that was not a rat. It advanced, baring its rodent teeth in a yellow daggered snarl of hate. The rat that was not a rat became suddenly motionless. Its sharp little nose pointed directly at the oncoming enemy. There came a noise, a tiny popping hiss, like that of a very small drop of water striking hot metal. From the left nostril of the not rat, a tiny glass-like needle snapped out at bullet speed. It struck the advancing rat in the center of the pink tongue that was visible in the open mouth. Then the not rat scuttled backward faster than any real rat could have moved. For a second, the real rat hesitated, and it may be that the realization penetrated into its dim brain that rats did not fight this way. Then, as the tiny needle dissolved in its bloodstream, it closed its eyes and collapsed, rolling limply off the rail to the rotted wooden tie beneath. The rat might come to before it was found and devoured by its fellows, or it might not. The not rat moved on, not caring either way. The human intelligence that looked out from the eyes of the not rat was only concerned with getting to the Nipe. "That's how we found the Nipe," Colonel Mannheim said. "And that's how we keep tabs on him now. We have over 700 of these remote control robots hidden in strategic spots throughout those tunnels now, and we can put more in whenever we want. But it took time to get everything set up this way. Now we can follow the Nipe wherever he goes, so long as he stays in those tunnels. If he went out through the one open-air exit up in the northern part of the island, we could have followed him by bird robots. But," he shrugged wryly, "I'm afraid the underwater problem still has us stumped. We can't get the carrier wave for the remote control impulses to go very far underwater." "How do you get your carrier wave underground to those tunnels?" Stanton asked. "And how do you keep the Nipe from picking up the radiation?" The colonel grinned widely. "One of the boys dreamed up a real cute gimmick. Those old steel rails themselves act as antennas for the broadcaster, and the rat's tail is the pickup antenna. As long as the rat is crawling right on the rail, only a microscopic amount of power is needed for control, not enough for the Nipe to pick up with his instruments. Each rat carries its own battery for motive power, and there are old copper power cables down there that we can send direct current through to recharge the batteries. And when we need them, the copper cables can be used as antennas. It took us quite a while to work the system out, but it's running smoothly now." Stanton rubbed his head thoughtfully. "Damn these gaps in my memory," he thought. It was sometimes embarrassing to ask questions that any schoolboy should know the answer to. "Aren't there ways of detecting objects underwater?" he asked after a moment. "Yes," said the colonel, "several of them. But they all require beamed energy of some kind to be reflected from the object we want to look at, and we don't dare use anything like that." He sat down on one corner of the table, his bright blue eyes looking up at Stanton. "That's been our big problem all along," he said seriously. "We have to keep the Nipe from knowing he's being watched. In the tunnels themselves, we've only used equipment that was already there, adding only what we absolutely had to, small things. A few strands of wire, a tiny relay, things that can be hidden in out-of-the-way places and can be made to look as though they were a part of the original old equipment. After all, He has his own alarm system in that maze of tunnels, and we have deliberately kept away from his detecting devices. He knows about the rats and ignores them. They're part of the environment, but we don't dare use anything that would tip him off to our knowledge of his whereabouts. One slip like that, and hundreds of human beings will have died in vain." "And if he stays down there too long," Stanton said levelly, "millions more may die." The colonel's face was grim as he looked directly into Stanton's eyes. "That's why you have to know your job down to the most minute detail when the time comes to act. The whole success of the plan will depend on you and you alone." Stanton's eyes didn't avoid the colonel's. "That's not true," he thought. "I'll be only one man on a team, and you know that, Colonel Mannheim, but you'd like to shove all the responsibility off onto someone else, someone stronger. You've finally met someone that you consider your superior in that way, and you want to unload. I wish I felt as confident as you do, but I don't." Aloud, he said, "Sure, nothing to it. All I have to do is take into account everything that's known about the Nipe and make allowances for everything that's not known." Then he smiled. "Not," he added, "that I can think of any other way to go about it." Third interlude. Mrs. Frobisher touched the control button that depolarized the window in the breakfast room, letting the morning sun stream in through the now transparent sheet of glass. Her attention was caught by something across the street, and she said in a low voice, "Larry, come here." Larry Frobisher looked up from his morning coffee. "What is it, hon?" "The Stanton boys. Come look." Frobisher sighed. "Who are the Stanton boys, and why should I come look?" But he got up and came over to the window. "See, over there on the walkway toward the play area," his wife said. "I see a boy pushing a wheeled contraption and 3 girls playing with a skip rope," Frobisher said. "Or do you mean that the Stanford boys are dressed up as girls?" "Stanton," she corrected him. "They just moved into the apartment on the first floor." "Who? The 3 girls?" "No, silly, the 2 Stanton boys and their mother. One of them is in that wheeled contraption. It's called a therapeutic chair." "Oh? So the poor kid's been hurt. What's so interesting about that, aside from morbid curiosity?" The boy pushing the chair went around a bend in the walkway out of sight, and Frobisher went back to his coffee while his wife spoke. "Their names are Mart and Bart," she said. "They're twins." "I should think," Frobisher said, applying himself to his breakfast, "that the mother would get a self-powered chair for the boy instead of making the other boy push it." "The poor boy can't control the chair, dear," said Mrs. Frobisher, still looking out the window after the vanished twins. "There's something wrong with his nervous system. I understand that he was exposed to some kind of radiation when he was only 2 years old. That's why the chair has to have all those funny instruments built into it. Even his heartbeat has to be controlled electronically." "Shame," said Frobisher, spearing a bit of sausage. "Kind of rough on both of 'em, I'd guess." "How do you mean, dear?" "Well, I mean well, for instance, why are they going over to the play area? Play games, right? So the ones that has got to push his brother over there. Can't just get out and go. Has to take the brother along too. Kind of a burden, see?" Mrs. Frobisher turned away from the window. "Why, Larry, I'm surprised at you, really. Don't you think the boy should take care of his brother?" "Oh, now, honey, I didn't mean that. It's hard on both of 'em. The kid in the chair has to sit there and watch his brother play baseball or jai-alai or whatever while he can't do anything himself. Like I say, kind of rough on both of 'em." "Well, yes, I suppose it must be. Want some more coffee?" "Thanks, honey. And another slice of toast, huh?" Chapter 10. Like some horrendous, watchful gargoyle, the Nipe crouched motionlessly on the shadowed roof of the low building. A short projection from the air conditioning intake was wide enough to keep him from being seen from the air, and the darkness of the roof prevented anyone on the street from seeing the 4 violet eyes that kept a careful account of all that went on in the store across the way from his observation post. The lights were still on inside the shop, shedding their glareless brightness through the transparent display windows to fall upon the street outside in large, luminous pools. The Nipe knew exactly what each man remaining inside was doing, and approximately what each would be doing for the next few minutes, and he watched with the expectation that his prophecies would be fulfilled. He had watched long and made a thorough study of this establishment, and tonight he expected to attain the goal for which he had worked so patiently. This raid was important in 2 ways. There were pieces of equipment he had to get, and they were in that shop. On the other hand, the raid was, and would be, basically a diversionary tactic. Now that he had located his real target, it was time to create a diversion that would draw his enemy's attention away from his immediate surroundings. This would be a raid that Colonel Walter Mannheim could not ignore. 2 men came out the front door. They spoke to someone still inside. "So long. See you tomorrow." Then they walked down the street together, conversing in low tones. The Nipe waited. Not until a 5th man stopped after he opened the door and flipped a switch on the inside did the Nipe make any motion. Then he flexed his 4 pairs of limbs in anticipation, but it wasn't quite time to act yet. The interior lights of the shop went out. Then the man carefully locked the front door, setting the alarms within the shop. Then, serene in the belief that his establishment was thoroughly protected from burglars, he too went down the street. The Nipe waited a few minutes longer before he left his observation post. All was normal, he decided. The time for action had come. The Nipe moved cautiously along the alley toward the rear of the building that was his target. The night watchman had returned to his cubicle, as he always did after his preliminary inspection of the building's alarm system. He would not leave for some time yet, if he followed his habits, and the Nipe saw no reason why he should not. Carefully, he approached the rear door of the little optical shop.
And that concludes Chapters 9 and 10 of Anything You Can Do by Randall Garrett. Be sure to come back next week for another installment.
As read by. Amazing stories read by amazing people.
This time on As Read By, we continue with the Growing Up series of stories from Tom Williams. This time, Tom tells us about family visits, Southern style. He has titled this one, appropriately enough,
Growing Up, Visiting Relatives. Visiting relatives on weekends were most always a treat, except one in Mississippi, and that was just because of our drinking water. As we kids played in the hot sun, we would go to the old galvanized bucket on the back porch and get a dipper of water. The dipper was made of a hollowed-out gourd. The only thing I'll bring up about these visits was their well water. It tasted like iron, an awful taste. There was so much iron in that water that my dad, with his brand of humor, warned me to not get near a magnet at least 2 days after drinking there. Now, the most fun visits were my uncle's Phelan's farm. He had inherited early on a few hundred acres, once again Indian land, from his father so that he would be listed as a farmer and wouldn't be called into World War I. This seemed to work. He mostly grew corn and did so with only 2 plow mules. The little house was as known in the South as a shotgun house. Front room was a bedroom, and the one in the back was a kitchen where we all entered and never came through the front. That more later, because this is a sad part of the story itself. The kitchen was sparse, like all Southern homes, with a wood-burning stove, a cabinet per table, and with 4 wooden chairs, covered with cowhide that he covered himself. On the wall, as I well remember, was a bullwhip, and he was very proficient with it. Going to his place was for us kids like going to the Old West. His wife Mary was a fiery redhead. The day he decided to take a wife, he had no time to go looking, as he was the only one to watch the place. So, as many did in those days, he placed an ad in the newspaper. Looking for a good wife who can help on the farm, must be able to clean and cook. Redhead preferred. Well, Aunt Mary answered that ad, and I believe that they were mostly happy together. Now the sad story about the front room that no one entered later on in her years, I can still see her laying in bed, almost unable to move because of the ravages of arthritis. I never heard her complain, but only lay there and listened to the visitors in the kitchen and her husband's constant jokes and stories, which I'm sure she heard 1,000,000 times. I know that no one should complain, but in this instant I wish I had some way of documenting his stories and jokes. That was our entertainment in the South, you know. My uncle was kind of odd in one way. He never drank his coffee from a cup. He would always pour his coffee into the saucer, and from there he would drink it. His coffee was strong, mainly because he used the grinds, as he called them, several times before throwing it into the garden. When you ask if you want one lump or two, I always thought he was asking about the coffee itself and not the sugar cubes. To keep the coffee from getting too bitter, he said he would grind up eggshells to boil with the grinds. Seemed to work. Getting to his house off the main paved road was an adventure for us kids. My dad would stop at the beginning of the dirt road and let me and Fred out of the car to ride on each fender. Oh, for you people nowadays, you may Google what a fender is if you don't know. Fred and I would ride on the fender down the bumpy road, holding on to the hood ornament with one hand. For us, it was like riding a bucking horse. I looked back at Dad laughing with that stogie cigar in the corner of his mouth. When we arrived at the old farm, we would jump down from the fender and open the wooden gate, which was twice as wide as the car itself. My uncle would look out the window to make sure Fred and I wasn't riding his gate. "You'll break my gate and make it sag. Don't do that." We did it anyways when he wasn't looking. We were stubborn as his plow mules. Now to the mules. Fred and I have heard our uncle's story so many times. One day we got up and left the adults at the kitchen table. Exploring the barn and corn crib, we saw the 2 plow mules near the fence. Fred had one of his ingenious ideas. Let's play cowboy and ride the mules. No mule saddles nor bridles to be found. We hopped on those old unsuspecting animals. Never been rode before. They were startled, bolted to the cornfield, and we plowed down rows of corn before we got control and brought the animals back. Needless to say, we were in deep trouble again the next time with my uncle. The downed rows of corn gave us away, I guess. And as he told us, them mules were useless for a week. That same day, my family stayed late, just a-talking, until around 10 or 11 o'clock. I'm not sure if they all had, in quotations, consumed something that night. But as we got into the car, the headlights didn't work at all. Without batting an eye, Dad gave me and Fred each a flashlight, probably expecting some kind of trouble like this. We both mounted the fenders, switched on the flashlights, and off we went into the night. It was only a few miles home, but it was miles of adventure for us. The highway was somewhat hilly, and as we would come over the hills and into the lower areas, we would go through banks of heavy fog, up the next hill and rising above the top of the fog for a moment, and then repeat all over again, all the wonderful way home, the full moon and the clear sky, with millions of stars and 2 tiny flashlights showing the way. Here's to family visits. Sincerely, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. When I was a kid, for the most part, we didn't visit family much. I think the distance had a lot to do with that. You see, I'm actually from the great state of Wisconsin, and after my dad died, my mom took all us kids out here to the Northwest to be closer to her parents. That made trips to the relatives far and few between. I do know that before this, my family did spend a lot of time together, but I had no memory of it. My mom remarried to a Northwest dad, and that became my family. I do have to say that I really liked that Wisconsin bunch, but most have gone now or moved to Florida. Now, one thing I am sure of is that my brother and sister could tell some great stories about those early years of growing up in Wisconsin. For those of you who don't know, Tom lives in Germany, was raised in the South, and has sent in these stories from his youth. I hope that you are enjoying them as much as I do. Thank you, Tom. And we end the podcast here. I want to thank this week's contributors, Schuler Johnson, Minnie Swan, Mark Nelson, and Tom Williams. Thanks, guys. And remember to send in those scary stories. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, it's easy to do. Just head to Ron's Amazing Stories, and there you'll find all the links you're going to need. We are on Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many other services. Do pick one and leave some feedback about the show. It really does help us to grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.